Shimishak Studiar kita. Welcome to Martoma Effect, a Sira podcast that explores different topics about the Catholic faith and the Sira Malabar Church. I'm your host, Akash, and with me today I have Simon Carrington on a new episode for our Word on the Street series. So Simon, welcome to the show. I'm good. How you doing?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. We've had you on for a lot of retreats. It's the first time we've put you behind the camera. So before we actually get started on our content, why don't you just quickly tell us a bit about yourself?
Okay, a bit about me. So most important part about me is I am a man of faith, of course, which is probably good to start with on this podcast. So love my faith, and I'm a husband. I'm a father to 4 kids. I had a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, 2-year-old, and one due in 3 months' time. And yeah, I've been blessed to be called to do this kind of ministry work in the faith. So I've full time. So it's not just a part-time ministry. For me, we go around to parishes, schools, youth camps like yours, speaking about God's plan for sex. Dating, marriage, all that fun stuff. So that's me, mate. I do enjoy the gym. I train harder than I diet, which is why I don't look as good as I should. But anyway, that's also a bit of a hobby of mine too.
It's great to hear. And so the full-time ministry, that's Fire Up Ministries, and that's solely about chastity?
Yeah. So when I first started, it was kind of like, I just speak about whatever people wanted about the Catholic faith. Started to really hone in though on just this one. It's just like that umbrella topic of our sexuality. It's massive. It's one topic that you can really just explore forever. And it's certainly it's the topic of the faith that I get most fired up about when I'm talking. So yeah, in the last kind of 5 or 6 years, that's all I really say I speak about now. So yeah, love it, mate. Love it. Love that topic.
Great to hear. So then what kind of brought you down this path? You said you're a man of faith. What is there, personally for me, I'm a Sira Malabar Catholic, and so, the founder of our church, St. Thomas, his big moment is, the My Lord, My God moment that he said to Christ. And so the words for that in Syriac is Marwala. So for me and a lot of people close to me, we call it a Marwala moment, or, the more common term is a Christ encounter. What's that encounter or that experience that you had that's really just brought you close to the church and decided you want to give your life to Christ?
Look, I think that there's probably a lot I could share, and I think my life has been like God's been I've been being like reconverted over and over and over again. I feel like I just had a big moment like 2 weeks ago, literally. Like I'm like, okay, like that new level of conversion. But a really big one for me was probably when I was like 15 or 16. So I was 15. It was in year 10. It was when World Youth Day was in Sydney. And I was blessed to hear a few talks about talks on chastity and on dating and relationships, and I was struggling a lot with my sexuality at that time. So I had just kind of discovered, I'd started my struggle with masturbation and with pornography, and I was very, very confused. I was like, all right, there's heaps of desires going on here. I'm not sure what to do with them. It looks like the Catholic Church just wants me to say no to everything I'm experiencing. No one really was able to guide me until I encountered speakers who unpacked the writings of St. John Paul II for me. And it was on that World Youth Day experience, that was really where everything changed. I bought every book I could find from Christopher West, who's the leading teacher on theology of the body, St. John Paul II's work, and just I've continued to just read from that, and so it really was, as we've heard it say, our mess can become our message, right? Yeah. So for me, it's kind of like, I think it's no surprise that my mess was my sexuality. I struggled a lot with it, wrestled a lot with it. Got very angry with God about understanding his plan for it, but through a very painful journey and kind of like, these multiple encounters through that teaching that that's really what has saved me. Literally, I think that teaching has saved my life. And I can remember in prayer saying, Lord, just help me be to others who Jason Evett and who Christopher West were to me. If it wasn't for these guys that gave their life to this work, I would not want to know where I would be, because I had planned to leave the church after I left school, and they got in just before. So that was really that was a blessing.
Praise the Lord to hear that. So then, great to hear about you and who you are. So I think we'll just jump straight into the content. So, a lot of our content is for youth. So one of the things we really want to touch on here is the topic of dating. When you come to our youth programs, and, even just the conversations we have with youth, there's so many like FAQs about, dating, about this, the before dating, the during dating season, after dating, what so many questions about it. So I think just to start off, let's get down to the very basic, right? Before you jump into dating, I think we need to first define love properly. I've heard you say it in your talks as well. We live in a pornified culture, and the understanding of what love is, whether it's an emotion or whatever, a feeling or whatever it is completely out the window right now. So I think just to set the foundation here, what is the church's teaching on love?
So love is really, and I think it's a good starting point, because I think for a lot of us we just think that that sex equals love, right? And so, but that's that can be a dangerous mindset to have, that sex just equals love, because real love, right, the highest expression of love, or the greatest example of love that we've ever experienced or seen, was God, who became man. And then gave his life for us. So love is sacrifice. Love is I like this word, and this is very St. John Paul II. Love is to give, so to be a gift of self to somebody else. So I think love is not about you, right? Love is not about you. Love is about being a gift to another person that you love, to lay down your life for that person. And I think with that mindset, right, once we've got that mindset, right, as Christians, okay, I'm called to be Christ to others. I'm called to love, to be a gift, to be selfless, to serve them. Then, and only then, once you've got that foundation stone, can you then say, okay, well then, how do we put sex and the whole topic of sex, if sex does equal sex, in some, when you've got that proper foundation, then sex can equal love, right? And so sex, but it's got to be all right. But sex understood as self-gift, right? Everything around the topic of relationships, with dating, with sexuality, right? All expressions of our sexuality must be understood on that foundation. If we don't have that, sex doesn't equal love. Sex equals lust, right? Sex just equals, I want to feel good. It's about pleasure. And then instead of seeing other people as gifts to be loved, we see them as things to be used, right? So that I would say as Christians is we've got to get that foundation first. And so even when I'm talking to parents, even when they're forming their children, I say it's never actually too early to start to educate kids about sexuality. Why? Because the foundation stone of education on sexuality is teaching people the value of self-gift. Then you can put the sexuality topic on that, and everything just falls into place. Especially with dating too.
That's good to hear. We're always told about, love is we have that mentality. Love is about take, and what can I get out of this person? I think you put it beautifully. The opposite of a love, which is self-gift, is to use another person, and that's where lust comes in too. So really good starting point for love, and I think something we definitely need to think about more. So I think that takes us well into the next question then. So what then is the purpose of dating? What's the need for that dating period?
Awesome. So I've just written a book on dating. Okay, it's a big one. It's taken me 3 years to write it. I'm editing the book right now, and so many there's a whole chapter that I've dedicated to answering this question, what is the purpose of dating, right? For Christians. And I think the most common answer that we will get is it's the purpose of dating is just to get to know someone. And so in our culture, what we've done is we have devalued dating to really being or to serving the purpose that friendship is meant to be serving. So really in friendship, that's when you get to know someone, right? We're hanging out, we're praying together, we're serving together. That's where like you guys are forming great friendships. We don't need to take every person on a one-on-one date to get to know them, right? You get to know people in friendships. The purpose of dating is actually to discern a spouse, right? The purpose of dating is to discern marriage with this person. And so I think, again, and I know this is like, it's impossible to kind of weave everything in here, but this is why it's like in my book, like the first 4 chapters of the book are all talking about friendship, right? And it's because it's really hard to have a really good understanding about the purpose of dating if we don't first have a really good understanding about the purpose and meaning of friendship and same-sex friendship and other sex friendship. So we have to be able to know how to foster really healthy like other sex friendships. So male-female friendships where you're hanging out together, praying, serving, all that stuff. Then and only then can we be like, okay, well then now that I know someone well and I can see they have great values, great qualities and all this stuff, then we can talk about maybe I'm being called to date them, which is to discern marriage with them. It's like a whole nother level or step. In our culture, what we've done is we've inverted that. And so we hang out at church and we hang out with people and we've got our other sex friends that we've just put in the friend zone, right? Yeah. It's like, oh, he's my brother, she's my sister. I would never think of dating them because we know each other really well, which doesn't make any sense to me. That's precisely why you should consider dating them, because you do know them very well and they're really good people, right? But then, so we have all these like great Catholic friends that we think are kind of off the radar, and then we go out clubbing or we're online trying to strike up something romantic with strangers that we know nothing about, and we date them thinking that we're dating people that are random, that we don't know anything about, and we're looking for a romantic spark. But the problem with that mindset is our dating is fueled more off how drawn I am to the person, like exteriorly or physically, and we don't pay as much attention to the inner values of the person, which can tend, when we get that backwards, we get all kinds of dating problems, and we're in a relationship with someone, we've been dating them for 6 months, and they're really attractive, like this man, right? Really attractive, smell really good, they dress really well, whatever it is. But how many couples I meet 6 months down the track and they're like, actually, we don't have anything in common, or actually, we had a lot of interests, right? We go for the same rugby team, or we like the same music, but our core values are not the same. We don't share the same faith, or maybe they were dishonest about how much they're really into the faith. All these kind of things start to surface. If we do it the other way around and have friendship first, then the purpose of dating just makes so much more sense. Anyway.
No,
I could keep going. I could keep going.
We'll look forward for that book to come out, and then we'll see everything. So then one interesting thing you mentioned there is, making sure we have the same values, right? Having the same faith. So I know one of the things I wrestled with, especially, in my earlier stages of faith and as a teen, was this idea that the church encourages us, as a Catholic, to preferably pursue relationships with other Catholics. Like, why does the church encourage us to go down that route? What are the trade-offs? Especially when we go on teens retreats, right? Yeah. We have teens coming up to us saying, like, out of nowhere, they'll drop a bombshell, like, I have a Muslim girlfriend, and stuff. And what's the issues with that? So that's a question I had, when I was younger, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who might be watching this having the same question. Yes. Why does the church encourage us to go down that route?
Massive question. Okay, so I think there's kind of a few layers here that are important. I don't say this as I don't say this to put anybody down, or as to judge someone, because as you just said too, right? We're all at a different stage of our journey. Okay, but think about it. The only person who's not going to have a problem in dating someone that doesn't share their faith again, there's no judgment here, but is someone that is probably not all in on their own faith, right? So someone that like doesn't really see that there's that much of a bigger difference between the Muslim faith or being an atheist or Hindu and being Catholic, right? And so I think I read it in a book from one of the Catholic speakers. They were like, the only way for faith in the topic of faith to not be a problem in a marriage or in a relationship is if both people don't really care too much about their different faiths, right? All you need is for one person to be invested in their faith, and there's going to be some conflict, right? So if I'm a fired up Catholic, right, and I'm in a relationship with an atheist, we can understand why there's going to be some challenges there, because if my faith isn't just a slice of the pie of my life, but it's the whole pie that my life fits into, it's going to be very difficult to share life with a person that doesn't even believe in the pie. Amen? So it's like, that's a challenge, right? Again, that's no judgment. We're all in different stages of our journey. But I do think that the question of why it's valuable to date and marry someone that shares your faith makes sense the more into your own faith you start to get, right? Also, it doesn't, I think, it doesn't tend, and this is being really honest, like you were in that situation as a teenager. There were girls that I was kind of drawn to in my teen years that, weren't as into the faith as I was. It's very hard to see why that's going to be a problem when you're 15. Yeah. Right? I think that's just standard. Why? Because when you're 15, you're not really playing out, how is this going to look in 10, 15 years time when I'm married? Yeah. Right? Or even wind a bit back from that. How is it going to look as we prepare to get married? What's our wedding day going to look like? But it starts to really hit home for people when they start thinking about, okay, what about when I have a child? Okay, is this difference in faith going to impact the way that we're going to baptize this child? Are we going to how are we going to raise this child? Are we going to educate this child, right? And again, as if you're a teenager watching this, it's easy to blow this off as like, okay, well, that's ages away. But the reality is that is when the faith difference really starts to become a problem. It's not as much of a problem when you're 15 and you're hanging out together and you're talking about stuff other than faith. But when you're trying to do life together, right, I think the church in her wisdom advises us to marry people who share the same faith, because when you do, and you mentioned like what's the trade-off if you don't marry someone of the same faith, it's very hard to grow in your faith, or it's hard to be supported in your faith if you marry someone who doesn't share your faith or who doesn't believe in your faith. Amen? Yeah. So it's going to be like, okay, well, like I want to go to Mass on Sunday, and then they're not too keen to come with you, or you want to say the rosary, but they don't want to pray it with you. You want to go to confession, but they don't see the point in confession, right? So what tends to happen is our faith does naturally start to weaken over time, because that primary person in your life is not helping or encouraging your faith. In fact, and I've seen this happen so many times, if a person of faith is dating or is married to a person who doesn't share their faith, whether they're Protestant even, right? Even being Protestant, there's going to be issues at Mass, confession, Mary, the saints, all that stuff. There's a whole list of, the Pope, the church versus the Bible, even though it's not a real battle, but they think it is, right? All that stuff, right? Think about it. The person who's Catholic is going to try over time, as they mention, every time they go to Mass, every time they go to confession, pray the rosary, all those things, that could possibly start to frustrate the person they're married to. And the person that they're married to might begin to get, if they're getting angry about that, or they start to resent the time they spend praying in a way that they don't, etc. That causes friction. What does that do? Then the person who's Catholic will naturally start to be like, the more I practice my faith, the more conflict I have in my relationship. So what happens? They naturally water down the practice of their faith. So this is what will happen. If you're a Catholic and you are dating a non-Catholic or even a non-Catholic Christian, right, certain practices of your faith, right, you will either weaken in your own practice of the faith, or, and this is always a great thing, right, they will begin to meet you where you're at. However, I would never encourage that as your strategy, right? So you should never be like, I'm a staunch Catholic, right? I'm going to go and find a Muslim who's really attractive, right? Or an atheist that's like really attractive, and I'm going to turn her or him into an evangelization project. It doesn't take long for the person to realize, I've become a project of evangelization, and this person is not really in love with me. They're in love with the person they think I could be if I let them fix me.
Yeah.
Bad plan. Okay. I would never encourage that. Okay. I could go on and on about this truthfully, but I think just one final thing that I think I would say, sorry, two quick things I think I'd like to say would be, firstly, when I speak about dating, so that question, it often stems from pain, right? So it's like, all right, like I've been wounded by Catholics, or I've been let down or disappointed by Catholics. There's other people of faith that, and this is the thing, their faith is like, may not be that important to them, but they're just respectful, kind people, and then they start looking there, right? So again, I can understand the origin of where that question might be stemming from, which all I would say to that is, Catholics, wake up. And there should be, right? If a girl was to date anybody else, right? If she was to date you, brother, there should be her experience of dating you versus a person of any other faith should be so different, because she should be like, this guy, like, he's sacrificial, he's virtuous, he's holy, he's prayerful. That's a beautiful experience. So as Catholics, we have an obligation to date differently, to date, like I'm not going to say date like Jesus, because he didn't date, right? But date with the mind of Christ, which is like, we lay our life down for each other, right? We're not there to use, we're there to give.
That radical self-gift you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, like if we're not dating in the shape of a crucifix, basically, right, then we're doing that wrong. And so I think that is an important point, is that I just say that point to encourage Catholics to step up and date as a Catholic or a Christian should.
Yeah.
Lastly, as a person married to a person who's fired up about her Catholic faith, there is just nothing like being married to someone who not only loves the same faith as you, but encourages and supports you when you're struggling. So being able to go to Mass with my wife, pray the Rosary, sing praise and worship, intercede for each other, fast together for the same purpose, do novenas together, go to retreats together, all that stuff. It's like do ministry together. There is just nothing like it. And I cannot imagine what my marriage would be like if I could not share Jesus with Madeline. So I would say, don't let a bad experience turn you off wanting that, because if you're deep down, I think you all want that. If you're serious about your faith, you want to marry someone that's serious about their faith. So don't lose hope that there is someone out there. How many people do you want to marry? Just one. You're only got to find one. Just find one person who's as fired up about Jesus as you are, and trust that God wants to bless you with that marriage more than you do, because from great Catholic marriages should come great Catholic kids. Yeah. And that's what we've got to do to win the world for God.
Yeah, praise God to hear that. So that sets the right standard for, when we're thinking of the person to date. So then from there, once I like this person, what's that starting process of wanting to date look like? One of the questions I get from a lot of the teens I talk to is like, okay, who makes the first move? Or like, is it as simple as like, okay, I like you, you like me, let's get jiggy with it? Or is it like, what's that process start like?
Okay. I think that's what we're doing in our culture right now, where it's just a little bit like, there's not much thought that goes into how it all begins. And if I may say so, I've got my head pretty deep in this cultural, the world of dating, and I would say it's not working. Right, I would say it's pretty messy in general out there. There's a lot of heartbreak, a lot of frustration. So, and this will be outlined in my book, but I have a just to give a very simple overview. I do have a bit of a guideline, I think, of how this all should start. So I have something. There's kind of 3 stages that I talk about. So there's observational friendship, there's intentional friendship. And then there is what we call the DTR conversation, right? Or which stands for define the relationship conversation. Those 3 things should happen, and in that order, prior to a first date, right? So this is the lead up to dating. I believe if only it was that easy to just be like, I like you, it's like I think that there is a bit of prep that needs to happen here, right? So what's observational friendship? Okay. The observational friendship phase is primarily to safeguard the men from jumping in too quick. So guys tend to we're very visual, right? We could walk into a Sarah Malabar youth camp, right? See a young woman and be like, oh, I'd love to marry her. Look how beautiful she is. And we're so drawn to the exterior of this, and I don't mean that in a lustful way. I'm not just saying, I'm not saying that to put anybody down. The reality is you could walk in, just see this stunningly beautiful young woman, and you're like, well, she's at a Catholic conference and, she's wearing a rosary bead around her neck or whatever, and be like, she must tick all the boxes. Our heart is filled with this sincere, enthusiasm and joy at her beauty, which is a good thing. God designed us to be like that. But the problem is, for a lot of us guys, is we just tend to jump on that and we respond just out of those warm fuzzy feelings, and we miss spending the time in and I don't mean this in a weird way or in a what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not encouraging you to stalk the girl, creepy. Right? Creepy way, that's right? A creepy way. But we should be spending time in observation of what is this person really like, right? So when we meet someone and they're really beautiful, or he's really handsome, and we just jump on that, what we do is we skip the necessary friendship phase, where we actually get to know the inner values of that person, right? So now the observational friendship phase, this works really well if this person is kind of a part of your world. Now, what do I mean by that? You see them at the Sarah Malabar camps, right? You're bumping into them here and there. You go to the same university. You go to the same gym. You work at the same cafe, whatever it is, right? You're seeing them all the time. So what you're doing is you're all right, I'm really drawn to him or I'm really drawn to her, but I'm just going to hit the brakes for a little bit. Now, not for months and months and months. This observational period, it might be 2 to 4 weeks at the most. I'm not encouraging, just go on and on. But all you want to do is all you're doing is you're just giving the emotional response you felt to that person time to stabilize, right? Because what tends to happen, and I think I'm not I'm not putting guys down, because I experienced this 100 times in my life, right? Yeah. You probably experienced this as well. We see a new girl. This is when I was single, by the way, right? I'm not still doing this all the time, right? But when we're single, right, we'll meet a girl, really drawn to them, right? There's a powerful experience of being attracted to her, and you talk for a little bit, they're in your head for 3 or 4 days later. You're kind of thinking about them, and then out of nowhere, right, through no fault of the girl, she did nothing wrong. I want to stress that the girl did nothing wrong. She did nothing sinful to turn you off her, but quite simply, you just move on and kind of forget about it, right? That's natural, right? Girls might hear that and be like, I knew guys were mean, right? No. But it's like, no, that's just the way we're wired. We respond very powerfully at the beginning, but the emotional high doesn't always last. That's no fault of the girl, but it's also no fault of the guy. Sometimes we'll experience a high, like being drawn to them emotionally very powerfully. But if we don't give that time to stabilize and kind of level out or keep growing through friendship, what tends to happen is guys will pounce when the emotional response is high.
Yeah.
They get the girl's number. They might ask her out for a coffee. They start pursuing like really intensely, right? And the girl's like, wow, like I'm being pursued. Like he's a nice guy as well. But what happens is 4 or 5 days later, they've been messaging, they've been calling, they've been hanging out. His emotional high is wearing out.
Yeah.
The girl did nothing wrong. She's beautiful, she's lovely, but the emotional response is just starting to dip. And so what happens is he starts to message a bit less, starts to call a little bit less. The girl's like, what did I do wrong? And then after a while, you know, she might be like, hey, like, are you still alive? You know, and he's checked out. Like he's like, he'll if she doesn't get the hint that he doesn't want to talk anymore, he'll just ignore her and ghost her, right? Now, I hear that happen, and I have been hearing that happening for the last 10 years. Now, it's not just guys that ghost girls, girls ghost guys as well, right?
Amen.
Girls will, amen, yeah, right? So like girls will also seem like they come on really strong in response to a guy, or maybe they initiate it, and then he's like, you know, chasing after her a little bit and she just drops off as well. So observational friendship is primarily to slow the guy down, but now that there's a bit of a cultural shift in girls starting to initiate as well, it's also useful for slowing the girl down as well. And what they're going to do is they're going to be like, right, I just want to give this a couple of weeks. I'm not going to go all in. I'm just going to observe from a healthy distance. And what I mean by healthy distance is not like a physical distance, but more of an emotional distance. So I'm not going to show this person that I'm all in and I'm super keen. And I'm going to speed this up, right? But if you do discern, okay, I think I actually do like this girl or this guy, I'm being very drawn to them. You would then move into what I call intentional friendship. And intentional friendship is when your goal, if the goal of observational friendship was to kind of, to not make it too obvious that you were all in, the goal of intentional friendship is to display interest in them, to see if you're getting any feedback, right? So this is kind of like it's a time to be like, all right, I'm going to start to show interest and see if I'm getting a response, or if they're making it super obvious they want nothing to do with this going further, then that's healthy feedback, right?
Yeah.
It's not the feedback you want, but it's healthy feedback, right? Now, I do believe, okay, and this is a bit old school, not everyone's going to like this. I do think that it is the man's responsibility to in the image of Christ to initiate the gift of love, right? So it's Christ that gives himself to the church, and the church, right, who receives and responds to the gift of love from the bridegroom. Now, St. Paul says in Ephesians 5, right, he uses the example of a husband and wife being a sign of or an image of the marriage of Christ and the church. And so quite literally on the altar when a husband and wife get married, the husband becomes Christ. He acts in the image and person of Christ. So marriage is the only sacrament that isn't actually isn't brought into effect by the priest. So in baptism, the priest says, I absolve you, right? Or in confession, you know, I baptize you, or I absolve you, right? It's the priest acting in the person of Christ who affects the sacrament. In marriage, it's actually the husband and wife that affect the sacrament with each other. I said, Simon, take you, Madeline, to be my wife. And in that moment, I literally was a sign of Christ. I became Christ in that moment. And Madeline, she embodies the church and is a sign of the church. And what does she do? She receives and nurtures. She's quite literally, she's nurturing the love that we share right now in her womb, right, in the form of a baby. And so I think that's really important, right? It's like the husband, right, and wife on the altar. If that's the goal, then we need to start that from as early on as we can. So I do tend to recommend that once we move into the intentional friendship phase, it should ideally be guided by the man, right? He's the one that should be trying to initiate places and ways to speak to the girl that he's drawn to. And she primarily should be the one, not because she's weaker than the man in that sense or anything, or we don't care what she thinks, but as a way to honor her. A woman is beautiful. She's the prize to be pursued, right? And so I think the woman should know that she's worth being pursued, right? So how does intentional friendship take place? I think this is really important. You primarily want to avoid being super exclusive. You want to spend time with them in the context of what I call their 3 Fs, right? Faith, family, and friends. And so as much as possible, you want to be like in group settings, in faith contexts. Why? Because it's harder to lie about your intentions and who you really are when you're surrounded by faithful people, your family and your friends. Your family and friends will also call you out if you're starting to lose yourself and your identity while you're pursuing this person or being pursued by that person. So having those extra eyes and support around you can safeguard you from a whole bunch of problems. I don't have time to get into all. I've got 5 reasons why you shouldn't be exclusive right in the early stages. I haven't got time to go into all those. All I would say is let's just focus on the positive. Surround yourself by good people in that process. Now, after you've been intentional friends for 2 to 4 weeks, that's when you'd have what I call the DTR relationship. I think the DTR relationship should be initiated by the guy for sure. And he is the one that should approach the girl and say, hey, literally the conversation, he defines what he would love the relationship to end up being or where it's going. And with Madeline, I was like, hey, I really, really like you. There's a lot of great qualities you have. And I actually said, before we even went on a first date, because the goal of the DTR is to provide a context and meaning for which the first date happens. That's really key, right? So I was like, I'm really drawn to you and I would love the opportunity to discern with you if God could be calling us to the sacrament of marriage together. Now, think of that's like, Simon, that's intense. Yes, it is intense. But what was beautiful was that Madeline was like, amazing. We just cleared the air. There was no confusion, pulling our hair out, wondering what the other person's thinking. I think the guy should back himself, right? If he's really drawn to the girl, have the DTR and give it meaning. If she responds well to that DTR, right? And she's like, yeah, I would love that as well. Then he asks her out on a date. And when you go on that date, you're like, wow, you've done all that preparation, right? You've both had time observing each other and you know, hey, we're good friends. We're drawn to each other. We're drawn to each other physically. We're drawn to each other spiritually. She responded to my initiations to like go to this event or pray this rosary or whatever it was. Now we're going on a date and the DTR has provided a framework where we both know we're not here to stuff around. We're not here to just kind of lead each other along. We're here because we both want to discern, is God calling us to marriage? It sounds a bit intense, but I actually think it's a lot simpler and a lot easier than the way we're dating in modern times, which is I like her or she likes him. Let's go out for a coffee, and then if it doesn't work, we ignore each other and one of us gets really hurt, or we just start dating without really knowing or investing time in discerning what is this person really like here. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that's so good. it's stuff that we don't hear about, especially that observational dating thing. I think because one thing, like I've spoken to a lot of friends of mine who are dating, and the one thing I've understood is like when you go with that I like you, you like me. There's error on both parties where one side is once you know the person likes you, you're putting up the best part of yourself, so you can't observe properly because the other side is conscious and they're not showing you their true self, and then the influx of emotions. It's like you're blinded by any of the red flags you might see because you're on that emotional high. Which I've mentioned before.
You should make a reel out of that clip. That was very good. Yes, red. Honestly, that is such a good point. Also, is that I think observational friendship, it really allows you to observe those red flags that we don't tend to notice when you just dive in based on emotion. Super valuable point. That's really good. Yeah,
Praise
I
God.
I agree.
So one sentence you said before was, the 3 Fs, right? And you said, so you don't lie about your intentions. So I guess that takes me to the next. It's a big question, but when you're dating, how far is too far?